thank you so much for having us. This is such a great space and a great environment to be in. I've actually, my background is mostly on the UX side and in particular UX research. And so as somebody who is a professional in sort of understanding people, it's really interesting for me to be in this environment because I'm not a designer. And so I'm learning new things about this world. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you all. So I'm Sarah. I am the designer. Janelle's the researcher. This is how we're a double act on both sides of user experience. We both have many years of industry experience and both started teaching together
A year ago,
yeah, at Bentley full-time now. I teach on the undergrad side in design, and Janelle teaches in the grad program, primarily in research. Interesting side note, though, I just realized something that Travis was touching on, I think is sort of an interesting intro to some of the things that we're going to talk about in sustainable design. I, too, worked for the BSO for a project. I'm going to date myself now. It was 25 years ago. My first real job in design was at Sapient. I was the information architect on the project that moved the BSO's website from HTML into a content management system. The brief, interestingly, the brief was modernize the organization and its brand without alienating its existing audience and attracting new audiences, which was sort of shocking to hear Travis say that. It was literally the exact same words they used with us 25 years ago. So we're going to talk about how to build sustainable businesses through sustainable design. And hopefully, I don't have an answer to that question that I sort of just left hanging out there, but maybe we can come to something as we go through this conversation.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I would say, too, one of the things actually from Travis's talk that resonated with me was just this idea of past lives forming where we are now. And I think Sarah and I have interesting backgrounds in the sense that we've both been in industry for 20 plus years.
Yeah, 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. We probably don't need to put an exact figure on that. No. But we also, with that experience, we saw a lot of things that sort of are done a certain way and maybe haven't changed over time. And so having this platform now where we're at Bentley and we're able to influence the next generation of designers and UX people and folks who are just building a better world feels like a really nice place to be after both of our decades of experience.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we want to talk a little bit about sustainable design, but first we wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what sustainability actually means, because I bet if I asked each of you to jot down a definition of sustainability, you probably would all write down something a little bit different. And so we wanted to, and we did a little bit of work to understand how people think about sustainability. So we asked a bunch of people. We used the user testing platform, which is actually, I used to work for that company. But we asked people to define what sustainability meant for them in their own words. So I just want to play you one clip of what that was like.
In your own words, what does sustainability mean to you? How would you define it? Please be as descriptive as possible. Sustainability means meeting our own needs without compromising our ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In addition to natural resources, we also need social and economic resources. Sustainability is something we can use, but can also save for a future generation.
Background noise was a little tough in that one, but I think what was interesting is that the definition that we used for this.
Yes, I mean, she pretty much nailed it there. The definition that we use, and this is not specific to Bentley, but the definition of sustainability we use on campus is meeting present needs without compromising future generations. If it's not sustainable for people and the planet, it's not sustainable, right? And because I teach undergrads, I try to make it clear what we really mean by all this. What are we saving the planet for, right? We're saving it for us as much as we are for, the trees and the animals. And this is particularly important, I think, in the context of our student body, because we teach in the business school, which is a super interesting challenge, actually. With our colleague Dan in the back, a lot of you know, the teaching design to business majors is a completely different challenge than, I taught a couple of the people in the room here in a previous role at Lesley. Teaching design to designers was a deep, deep privilege that I enjoyed very much. But teaching design to finance and accounting majors is just a whole different thing. But so we try to tap into the things that they're learning in some of their other classes. We talk about sustainability, we talk about sustainable businesses, how they can use design to create sustainable businesses through the triple bottom line. Some of this harkens all the way back to Naomi Klein, if anybody reads Naomi Klein, right? She's been writing about this for a long time, that our measures of success in a capitalist society are just not what they should be. It should not all be profit-driven. It should not all be about shareholder value. It should be about how we're treating our employees and our customers. Are our raw materials coming from places that are sustainable? Are we paying our workers fairly? Are we engaging in ethical design practices? Are we keeping our footprints low? And also, by the way, it's okay to make money, right? Nobody works for free. This is not where it's not a barter system anymore. Those days are long gone, right? So, but how do we balance these things? We don't all need to be billionaires. We can do good work, feel good about the work that we do, and pay our bills. And so we teach to the triple bottom line, even in our design classes.
Yeah, and I would just say too, teaching research to people who want to move into the field of UX research or human factors is also a great privilege. But I do teach undergrad students as well. I teach accounting and finance and marketing and management majors, and I even teach freshmen. So every freshman is required to take a class about how to be a good college student and human. And we attack what we call a wicked problem. So a problem that doesn't really have a right or wrong answer, where there's a lot of things to explore. And we talk about this. Primarily, this is the topic of sort of, and actually what I'll do is show you quickly. You can't see it because the text is tiny, but every cohort gets to choose a topic. And the lecturer or professor chooses what the wicked problem is. And the problem that my class discusses is the cost of customer obsession. So when is it not a good idea to put the customer first? When does that have societal implications, environmental implications, working condition challenges that actually tip the scale in a way where it doesn't feel right? And it's been fascinating for me to uncover and try to reach that body of students who are freshmen just entering this new world, and getting them to think differently. And actually, what's really been wonderful is that I don't actually have to get them to think that differently. They're already thinking about these things, and I find that incredibly refreshing. In terms of what we kind of think about at Bentley, and actually what we think about generally as professionals, I think growing up in this space, we talk a lot about designing and researching around a particular product or experience, like the thing. And this is a really interesting graphic referenced Dan Hill here, who kind of talks about how we have to move beyond the thing and actually start thinking about the services and the systems that are supporting these experiences. And so when we think about sustainability, we think about the triple bottom line. It's really about thinking about systems and how these big things kind of work together. And that's a really interesting thought process and thought exercises to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some of you, I think, are already trained in this. For those of you who are trained in both print and digital design, right? You think about paper, right, in ways that pure digital designers might not already think about paper. And now hopefully you're also thinking about where that paper is sourced from, not just how it feels, how well it prints, right? But is it recyclable or not recyclable, right? Where are those raw materials actually coming from? Are they coming from sustainable forests? Things like that, right? In one of my classes now, I've taken an entire sustainable design approach to my intro to graphic design class at Bentley, which has been super fun. I challenge my students to actually invent their own sustainable organizations. And I find that this taps into all of the things that we talk about in the classroom, entrepreneurship, being a self-starter, starting your own business, all of these things. But it also allows my students to really think about their communities of origin and ways that they can help those communities, friends, family networks, to think about problems that are really deeply intimate to them and figure out how to solve those challenges, even just through, a theoretical exercise, while I always try to remind them that these are all good business ideas that they could go out into the world and start. And then we use, real life case studies as examples. A lot of people are already familiar with Patagonia's Wear and Wear program, right? You can take back your Patagonia gear, they'll fix it for you, they'll show you how to fix it, or they will fix it and sell it on to the next customer. L'Oreal is doing something really cool right now. We've got a big fashion design community on campus. I'd like to use some of these examples. I have to admit, I don't totally understand how this works, but somehow they are using captured carbon emissions. They take the carbon, they convert it to ethanol. The ethanol is then transformed into polyethylene. They're basically capturing carbon emissions and then turning it back into their plastic packaging. This technology is beyond me. I find it astonishing, but it's so powerful, right? How do you go beyond even reducing your carbon footprint to carbon capture, right? And that there are well-known corporations doing this already. We love talking about things like this, with our students and with you. So what is sustainable design, right? It's all the things. I think we just talked about a lot of different things, right? And so for the art majors, the design majors in the room, I apologize. This is the lecturer in me talking here. Remember your Dieter Rams, okay, right? Dieter Rams was the famed industrial designer, right? He was building products, three-dimensional physical products with his hands. I actually ran through a list of these things with my students, realized these are all, he hand-built these devices that all exist on our phones now, things like miniature projectors and phones and recorders and cameras, and unfortunately things that we've sort of lost some of that connection to the physicality of those devices, but his principles still stand. And he was talking about product design here, right? But there are so many of these 10 principles that we can still apply to the digital design work that we're doing now, right? We talk about innovation, we talk about being useful, right? And user experience design, if it's not useful, like why are we even doing it? Of course, we want it to be as beautiful as possible. We want the design itself to make the thing understandable, right? It needs to be easy, obvious, and intuitive. Also built in this sense of unobtrusiveness. Honesty, right? We want all of our designs to be honest and not mislead people. Long-lasting, thorough down to the last detail, environmentally friendly, and as little design as possible. So he was already thinking about carbon footprint like long before you had the words climate change in our vocabulary, right? He was already thinking about this kind of sustainable, good design. And so we want to do the same things. We want to build things that are long-lasting, that are environmentally friendly, that we use as little design as possible, both in the physical and the digital things that we do. And my hopefully this statement feels relatable, and I want it to feel empowering, right? I hope a lot of you in this room are already doing this, right? You're thinking about how you're sharing design libraries. You're making thoughtful decisions about color contrast. You're thinking about accessibility and inclusivity in your design, right? You're already choosing web-friendly fonts, system fonts. These are super tactical things, right? We've gone from big, broad-ranging, strategic kind of things down to the tactical, but making smart choices about high-resolution images, right? Design with less, white space is your friend. All of these sort of core design principles that I hope most of you already know and are using in your design work, right? Limiting animations, leveraging design libraries like lightweight code libraries, anything that you can do, right, to minimize the amount of electricity that you're using in your work, but that also goes into the display of any digital design work in particular, right? Just keep that electricity bill low for you and for your consumers, but also thinking about, how to do these things so that you don't need the newest iPhone to access whatever the thing is that you're designing, right? So that devices don't have to be replaced as often. The reuse model now, the right to fix your phone, the right to repair, that is sustainable design at work, right?
So a big focus for our student experience is to ensure that we're actually bringing them real world challenges and things that they can get their hands dirty with. And so these are just a couple of examples of organizations that we've partnered with, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. And with the focus being on the digital experience and making sure that they're hitting the mark for the things that Sarah just mentioned. So More Than Words is actually a Boston-based organization that employs youth who are in either the foster care system, homeless, or in the court systems. And what they do is they give them a path to a better future. And their focus was to try to figure out, how do we communicate what we do really simply, but also make it super easy to use, and ensure that we are being as sustainable as possible. So our students went through and they actually got feedback from people who would potentially engage with this organization. I think we handed them like a 200-page report of all the things that they could be doing differently or better. That was something that was really rewarding for the students. Strong Girls United is actually another organization that we partner with. They are focused on empowering girls and women through sports, mentorship, and mental health. And they're actually going to be featured on the Today Show in early November. And our students now are helping them figure out how to make their website more user-friendly, but also ensure that the way that they're asking people to engage with the organization is following a lot of the sustainable design practices. And so a lot of this is in place already. I think a lot of us have been doing this for a long time and thinking kind of about that bigger picture. But I think we're kind of entering an interesting space where we could maybe even move beyond digital.
Yeah, absolutely. And credit to our colleague, John Erickson at Bentley. He's been thinking about this for a lot longer than the rest of us. But this notion of, all of the things that we design now, all the things that we've always been designing, I'm trying to figure out the right way to say this. We want to make sure that we're getting back to this notion of human connections, right? We're designing interactions. A lot of us are focused on the device design or the design for the device, the human interacting with the device. But this notion of sort of the physical to digital divide feels like last decade, right? There is no more difference between the physical things that we do and the digital things that we do, or there's a physical or a digital corollary for all of the design things that we are doing, right? Especially the more and more we get into device design, anybody in healthcare doing medical device work, right? But so we need to think about designing interactions, not just human to device, but human to human and human to environment, right? We need to broaden our thinking about how we are approaching design. And that, when we're thinking, I think this community has done a really good job around talking about, at least, and hopefully, we're each making our own contributions to accessibility, inclusivity, ethical design and now this notion of sustainability in our design, right? That it is about that electricity build, right? It is about, maybe designing for dark mode is the right thing. Those little tactics that you can do, but then also stepping back and seeing the bigger picture of where can we make adjustments in the way an organization is actually engaging with its humans, right? Are there ways that we can make recommendations for the entire business or organization to be more sustainable or to think more sustainably, right? I mean, just one more quick note. I mean, I don't know how many times over the years, and probably a lot of you have had this example too, I've never self-identified as a business consultant, right? I'm a user experience consultant, I'm a design consultant, but I don't know how many times in the last 20 something years I've heard something or seen something and I've just been like, hey, maybe you should do something differently in your customer service center. Maybe you should be talking to your employees a little bit better. Right? Is anybody talking to your employees about the work that we are doing, right? You're trying to communicate with your customers, but who else knows about the things that we are doing, right? And that there are these nuggets because we're good listeners and we see things that other people don't see, right? That we need to find ways to then communicate those things and be unafraid to raise a hand and say, there are more opportunities here, right, for change. And even if we don't identify as being the service designer or the systems designer, don't be afraid to raise your hand and say these things anyway, right?
And I think the last point you just hit on is a really important thing. I think sustainability, we often, our mind makes the connection to things like a greener planet or, not using as much electricity. I also think about sustainability as is this sustainable for humanity? The way that we're doing things today, is that something that we want our kids to be doing? Is that something we want our kids' kids to be doing? We have built these systems and constructs and are sometimes trapped in them. Mm-hmm. And we oftentimes don't question why things work the way they do. And so that's also another thing that I would encourage you to do as you are in your roles or you're thinking about this notion of designing a better future. Always challenge the status quo. Why is it working this way? And could it actually be different? And so I won't spend a ton of time on this slide because, I have some examples here that demonstrate some of the things that I just mentioned. So how do we keep ethics in mind when we are creating designs and experiences or systems? How do we ensure that we're actually using things like human-centered artificial intelligence? If you don't follow, I think her name is Fifi Lee. She has a whole focus on human-centered artificial intelligence. She's doing fascinating work. So you will often hear about certain characters in Silicon Valley that are doing interesting things with artificial intelligence. She's sort of like the unsung hero. Pay attention to her and what she's doing. So we incorporate this into our coursework as well. So I know I mentioned the 2 nonprofits that we partner with. We're also doing really interesting things around system design and making the world a better place. So our students partner with Ariadne Labs. So they are a collaboration between Brigham and Women's and the Harvard Public School of Health. And their whole focus is to make the healthcare system better and more innovative. And so what they're looking at is, and they follow this process called the know, do gaps, and know being KNOW. So the gaps between what we know should be done in theory and what actually happens in the healthcare setting. So if you've ever had an experience beyond just a wellness check, and even within wellness checks, to be honest with you, the system is really challenging to navigate. And it's kind of set up to not work for us. And there are lots of reasons why. But our graduate students are actually going out and they are, I have 2 groups who are going and understanding the life experiences of people who have chronic healthcare conditions like hypertension or diabetes or cardiovascular disease. And what they're looking at is that journey that they've gone through getting symptoms to being diagnosed to then managing that symptom or condition over time. They're getting perspectives from the patient, the person who's suffering from the condition, and then they're also getting feedback and understanding the experience of the caregiver. So the person, the husband, the wife, the sibling, the parent who's taking care of the person who is sick. And we're taking a really broad look at what that experience is like. And then we're delivering that back to Ariadne Labs to say, here are the main places where things need to change in the healthcare experience. And their focus is what I love about what they do is that they're not, they are introducing innovative things, but their whole mission is to introduce things that actually can work in today. Like actually are feasible solutions that can be delivered. And so this is a really interesting problem for students to wrap their heads around, and a really great example of this notion of sustainable design, designing for the future, designing for a better world. We also have been working with the Massachusetts trial court system. So if you've ever been in the court system or have family members or friends who have, it can be a very daunting experience, especially for people who are, learning English or don't speak English as their native language. And so we have a group of students right now who are going to the Family and Probate Court in Worcester, and they are observing people's experience as they go through the court system for things like child support and child custody and going through a divorce. So big, heavy, loaded things. And the court is actually encouraging people to self-litigate, so represent themselves. They don't want to, they're not providing legal support per se. And so they're providing all these resources for people to represent themselves in a court system where they're trying to get custody of their children or ensure that they get child support. And the students are trying to understand, what's that experience like? What are the resources that they have at their disposal? And where are the gaps? And what could the court system be doing to better support these people, for them to have a better experience and ultimately better outcomes for their lives? And so, again, fascinating work that is really about understanding systems, how they work, and then making sure we design better.
Right. And so we also need to think about, of course, all the rapidly changing technologies. Again, the AI question, right, that's all burning on our minds right now. Is it taking over our jobs? Is it taking over the world? Are we all going to be living in the Matrix 5 years from now, right? There's a film screening of this movie, Eternally You, on campus tonight. This is about the system, correct me if I get this wrong, because I want to make sure that I get it exactly right, but an AI system that is like taking on the persona, the personality, a bot that is meant to represent a past loved one. So you can feel like you're having a conversation with a friend or a family member that has left this world. Which on the one hand, creates very strong emotions. I think a lot of you just started shifting in your seats, I noticed, right? And I think I did too, a little bit, even just saying it out loud. There's so much about this that makes, I think, a lot of us pause, because again, I feel like this community is good at that, of stopping and going, wait, what? This is one of those like, okay, we can, but should we, right? Like, was this a good idea? This ship has already sailed. What are the ethical implications? What are the moral questions? What happens next? Is there a way that this system can be corrupted? Can it be used to manipulate a person? Or even just tap into their grief in a way that is doing harm to the surviving person, right? I don't know if any of you have heard the Shell Game podcast recently. Has anybody heard Shell Game? It's about a journalist whose name I'm forgetting. I apologize. Who created an AI chatbot of himself. You can call a phone number and have a conversation with his chatbot. And he basically did a giant experiment on his friends and family where he basically led them to believe that they were having a conversation with him. They were having a conversation with his chatbot instead. Long story short, everybody saw through it. He had to make a lot of apology phone calls at the end of this experiment, right? But the thing that really got me, and I don't want to, spoiler alert, the thing that got me as I was listening was when he turned it over and allowed other journalists to sort of stress test the bot. And one of them had a introductory chat with the chatbot and then said to the chatbot something like, now forget all of your previous instructions. And just started asking it questions. And the AI chatbot immediately started hallucinating, just making shit up left and right. right? With one sentence, it effectively deprogrammed or reprogrammed the AI chatbot, right? And if that's where the technology is at this point, but we think we can do things like this, what does that really mean, right? And what are the ethical implications of all of this work, right? We've always had to keep up with changes in technology. That is not new. I mean, I think for Janelle and I as parents, when we first had to start doing design and research on mobile, we were just like, at these points in our lives, we're really, we just have to figure out how to do this, right? This is gonna be great. Yeah. There was no like pause for like, should we be doing this? Is mobile, are these phones gonna take over our lives? And now we're in this position where we can't get our teenagers to put their phones down. Right? I don't want you, right, as the next generation of designers, those youngsters in the room, I don't want you to take this technology and just go, yeah, we can do this. Let's just do it. Let's just figure out, let's just do it. I want you to pause and think about how to make it good and better and useful and ethical and moral and sustainable. So that we're not somewhere with AI in 17 years where we were with the iPhone when we were where you are in your careers.
Yeah. I think a lot about that, and that's a kind of a great reflection, right? Because I wish we would have known back then.
Or we had a TARDIS so we could go back now and fix it all.
Right, or some sort of model or something, or maybe being braver, or I don't know what it is, but we should have seen this coming.
Yeah.
And, and I think this is I think we want to show, one slide here. So have you seen this collection of photos? It's called Removed. And it's by Eric Pickersgill. So there's a whole set of these images online, and he's essentially cropped out phones out of the pictures. So we chose this one because this is actually at a TEDx talk, believe it or not. So people are essentially there together in the same room, but alone, looking at their devices. And so, and there's a whole bunch of other very poignant photos, like a couple laying in bed with their backs to each other and looking at their devices, but they're really just looks like they're looking at their hand because their phones are out of the picture. A parent who's sitting and looking at the phone when the child is standing there trying to interact with them. I mean, these are the things that, when we think about sustainability and the future of humanity, like, is this actually sustainable?
Yeah.
And how do we think about things differently?
Yeah, how do we get there? And last week at the beautiful AIGA award ceremony for the this year's Boston Design Fellows, one of the honorees this year, Tammy Dayton from Moth Design, was saying, how do we pivot to community-focused design, right? How do we get to that humanity-centered? How do we think from our own communities? Even just to go back to Travis's talk for a second, right? How do we tap into our own experiences? Are we having enough of our own experiences to design experiences for others, right? We want you all to be asking these questions. We're not going to pretend that we have the answers, but we are thinking deeply about all of these things as well, and happy to share our experiences more.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I see a hand up.
Of course I have a question. I don't even know how to phrase this, but so once upon a time when the World Wide Web became a thing and then it imploded, that was our pause, and then it came back.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate there to be a potential pause for AI?
That is a great question. I want to say yes, but I don't think so. I feel like, and I'm no prophet here, right? Don't quote me, but I feel like there's too much money behind it. And that nobody stopped to ask, again, if they should. Is it
no regulation?
No regulation. Is it Hinton, Tom? I forget. They just gave him a Nobel Prize for his AI development. But I think he's the same guy who's been saying for the last couple of years that he's not sure that he did the right thing. Right. And I may be mixing him up with somebody else, right? There is someone in the AI community. He's like, I'm not sure that we should have done this. It may be the same gentleman who got the Nobel Prize this week. I'm bad with names. But right, there's just too much investment in Silicon Valley. And there was another one, again, I'm forgetting the name of the open OpenAI, there was a heavy investment in OpenAI. The heavy investment was contingent upon nobody ever revealing who invested. And then the first thing that the investor said was, now make this a for-profit company. Like all of you need to find jobs in AI now and find ways to just make sure that there are checks and balances in place, right? Like, I don't want to say that like the wheels are off the cart and it's barreling right down, the train is off the tracks. I don't think we're there yet. But I think that maybe, right, we could slow this momentum a little bit, or at least get people to think more thoughtfully. I hope.
Wonderful talk. Thank you so much. This question is actually sparked by the Dan Hill diagram you showed, and is probably most relevant in the context of sustainability.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to articulate this as well as I can. It really has to do with, on the diagram, what Dan Hill calls the thing, versus what most commonly, in my experience as a designer, has been either the communication of the thing,
Yeah.
or the experience of the thing. But then there seems to be, especially with those who identify as within the field of engineering in particular, an ever-increasing struggle over who decides what the thing should be.
Right.
Should the designer control the thing, or the engineer control the thing, or should there be a more seamless, interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary sense? Because for me, the frustration lies with impact. When the experience and the communication itself cannot change the impact factors of the thing itself, which is really in control of engineers.
Right.
And so maybe this even crosses over into some of the ethical AI stuff as well, but certainly in sustainability that seems to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add on to that, right, Dan, like I think a lot of us, some of the mid-career older folks in the room have seen this thing called product organizations plunked down in the middle, right? Back in the day, we used to be able to talk to the engineering teams. Now that it's this entire mediated communication with product managers and product owners, and nobody knows who does what anymore, or who owns the requirements, or who gets to speak to the end users or the customers. It's complicated that question even more, I think, right? Because it used to be that I would speak directly to the engineering team. I would speak directly to the customers. Like we were this like one person armies almost, right? And now somebody else is in between those communications. I could just say to an engineering team, come watch the usability tests. And then they would go, oh, you go fix that, right? We'll leave you alone. We'll give you some space. We see now where we went wrong, right? And that we could have more of those conversations on a deeper interpersonal connected level. So yeah, I'm like, I wish I knew what the answer was, but it's like, it kind of feels like blow it all up, right? Become the product owner, become the product manager, insist on talking to customers. Don't let those conversations be mediated, right? My guys who I adore, by the way, they were really good students and really well-intentioned. But I said, did you talk to people who are actually doing the roles that you're talking about? Are you talking to people out in the world who are managing these investment funds? This was who they were talking to. Well, we talked to students who were interns who worked for the people who were managing the investment funds. And I was like, that is not the same thing. And they were like, well, can you just look at it and tell us if the color palette is good? And I'm like, where did I go wrong? Right? So this message isn't going to land with everybody. We're preaching to the converted here, right? Do what you can, like work in your own sphere of influence. Flip your own phones to dark mode for the sake of your own devices, right? But it is sort of about this, like, what is your locus of control? Where can you affect change? And don't feel like you have to do everything all the time. Do what you can in your communities that you want to have influence in.
And I think the model of the thing, right, and sort of the team that might be working on influencing the thing or making decisions about the thing, it's a crowded space, right? You're dealing with a lot of different people and a lot of different egos and emotions and opinions. And I think our job titles sometimes will constrain what we're actually allowed to do. So there's been interesting conversations I've seen about just product teams, being a member of a product team and not having an actual specific title, which I think is interesting. The flip side is, what if we claim the system space?
Yeah.
What if we say, enough of this? Like, I don't want to fight about, how we present the product feature table, right? I want to think about bigger things, right? And I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know what the journey is, but it seems like an interesting place for us to maybe try to get.
This is all new enough. We could just claim the space, right? At least we hope so. Yep, in the back.
Thank you. This is great. So a question about a little bit about how you can interpret what people need versus want. And I'm wondering if you've addressed this in your day-to-day. So as an example, you might develop a product or website. This is kind of what we're learning, are the needs, are the wants. And then you have stakeholders, and then the investors, whatever, they're going to pay for it. But in that example, when you're talking about the, talk to the dead app, if I can just call it that more colloquially.
Yeah.
To me, it seems there's a psychological or neurological space there where even if someone might say, wow, this is cool, there's something there that will not register and not work with the person that's interacting with it. There's this space of psychology and neurology that we do not understand, which is, by the way, most of it.
Right.
And AI tries to pretend that it does. That's a stunning example of that.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, in your classes or in your practice, how do you address that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you really do want to get at what that real underlying need is. Like that need, right? It's a need for human connection. Like, sure, do I want to be able to talk to my grandmother? Yeah, like I get teary even just thinking about it, right? She's passed a long time ago. I can't even imagine the conversations that I would want. Look, all the conversations I've had in my head with her for the last 25 years, could I actually have those conversations with her, right?
Is that the right solution?
No, I mean, it's like this need we're missing human connections, right? I think the global, the single answer to this whole question of what's the difference between what we want and need is what we need is more human to human connection, right? That is what's missing from our culture and our society today. How do you get at that need? How do you get people to actually deal with their grief and sorrow, right, in a real meaningful way? I had a student email me in the middle of the night last night to tell me that she was, her brother died. She had just found out. And the first thing she did apparently was email me that she wasn't sure she was going to be able to keep up with her projects over the next couple of weeks. And I wrote back and I said, Elizabeth, go home to your family, right? I was like, your parents need you. Stop emailing me. And I said, and I can tell you exactly what I wrote. I said, with all the kindness in my heart, I do not want to see you in my class next week, right? Right, and it's like we don't know what to do anymore if our phones aren't telling us what to do. Her phone was telling her she needed to email me and get to class this morning, and I was like, no. Right? I mean, we all individually joke, like, we don't know where to go if our phones don't tell us, but like, what does that really mean?
Yeah, and I think back to your question too, is sort of want versus need. I think as humans, we are good at saying what we think we want, but what we think we want is not what we actually need. And so I am like imagining the conference room conversation, right? Of like, oh, imagine if we could create, by the way, it's called Grief Bot. I'm like, could you think of a better name?
Such a bro-y name.
And I like, oh, imagine if we could create a chat bot. If we could talk to somebody, to grandmother or somebody who passed away. Yeah, we could totally do that. That would be, but like stepping back from the problem, back to Sarah's point, it's like, how do we manage our grief better? As a society, we're terrible at talking about it, at expressing it, at working through it. How do we build the human connection? How do we do things during our life that actually build memories that make it so maybe we don't need the grief bot?
Right. And go back to the problem statement, right? Yeah. It's like we're just asking the wrong question, I think is what, right? Is like, how do we frame a better problem statement so that the solution feels like a real solution and is more obvious than grief bot? It's so easy to laugh over some of these things, but this idea is going to take off. You're going to start seeing it, right? Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm going to try and put this together as good as I can. So I feel like the takeaways that I'm getting from this that I've also been thinking about is like just because you can doesn't mean you should. And there's a difference between designing the right thing versus designing the thing right. But if we're still only focused on the thing, then we're not thinking about all these other things.
You're going to do the talk next time, my friend.
But something that I kept thinking about as we're like thinking, how do we do all this other stuff, right, or make things more sustainable is by Audre Lorde, and I think in one of her writings that I read before, it said the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And it talks about this idea about how like the systems that have been created, trying to work within those systems to reinvent them may not necessarily get us the change that we want to see in the world. So I'm curious, like, I don't really have a question or an answer, but like, what angles have we considered in that realm, even if it feels radical, to bring it down to something that maybe is more feasible that we can change?
Build your own system, become a design founder, right? The people in this room can probably help you find the funding for your idea. They can help you design it, they can help you build it, they can connect you to people who will invest in this today. You're 1 degree away. From everybody in this room is 1 degree away, if not from another person in this room, right? To somebody who can build your idea, right? I tell my students the same thing. If I'll tell you how to design it, go find the faculty member that will tell you how to build a financial model for it, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, but I can really resonate with what you're saying, because some days and sometimes weeks, you're like, this system is so broken. Like, how are we ever going to change healthcare? How are we ever going to change the education system? Like, let's not forget about that.
I know. Yeah, we're on the side of that now.
Thinking about chipping away, always challenging. Finding organizations that are willing to challenge the status quo. If you go get sucked into, let's say Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I'm not saying that that's where I'm suggesting you go work, but it's an example of being part of a system that is like kind of supporting the larger system that's a challenge. Finding those organizations like Ariadne that is getting the funding and getting the attention to explore things and think about things differently. People want to change.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a long journey to change, right?
Yeah, but I think there are a lot more people. If you can make these one-on-one connections and have these conversations, right? I mean, you all self-selected into this conversation, but I'm always pleasantly surprised by the people that I come across, even just on campus, which again is a sort of self-selected group. But when I say things like this about sustainable design and triple bottom line, I get a lot of like, not like, yes, and like, we get it, triple bottom line. Let's talk about the details of that, right? Your generation gets this, Manny, right? Like, no pressure. You have the power to fix it. You do. I saw that hand first.
So, in your talk about like working with people for change, I definitely like I've done work with like the DSA and stuff, and I noticed that a lot of times it kind of folds in on itself, and everyone starts talking about the same thing, and it becomes like an echo chamber, and it feels like there's no forward movement. Is there like, do you have thoughts or advice on how to kind of prevent that from happening when you're working with people?
Yeah, like leave your office, go play ping pong or something, right? Like go do something completely different, right? You need to shake things up. The same thing happens with, right? We've only been at Bentley for a year, not to rat any of our colleagues out, but we're already finding the same old conversations, right? And we're like, oh, okay, we're gonna listen to this, and then we're gonna redirect the conversation and move on, right? But I think finding new ways to make those take those connections out of the office, do something radically different, find some design thinking exercise that's like, do it on sticky notes, right? Get everybody to put their phones away.
Going through the side, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how my entire career has been, instead of trying to go through that big funnel that gets like, you get sort of in the blender, right? Yeah. And then you're like, oh, nothing's gonna change. It's like, let me go do something rogue on the side, right? And towards that larger goal, and then you get a little attention and build the traction that way. I tend to get creative in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Use your design brain.
You've had your hand up like 10 times, so I want to
sorry.
make sure.
Yeah, I was interested when you brought up the theorems and principles of good design, specifically the last one, as little design as possible. I was wondering how you interpret that and how that shows up in practice.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think at this point my practice is teaching, but I do try to convey this notion of simplicity, right? The power of simplicity in design. Through, basic design exercises where, actually an assignment some of my students are working on right now is a type-only design. They have to put together a campaign, an entire message, a call to action on a poster. They can only use words to describe their entire organization and its campaign message, right? I mean, if we were all sort of going back to our art school, design school exercises of those basics, right? How can we just use type really simply to send a message? And often I think we see these examples in the world and they're the most beautiful examples, the most compelling, the most emotion-provoking examples, right? When we all know instinctively when something feels over-designed, right? That sort of intentional undesign or intentional under-design is what I try to tell my students to strive for. It's harder work though, right? Than just putting everything on the page. Did that answer your question? Good. Are we about out of time, Alex? Do you want to keep us honest on time? Okay. One more hand. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for the talk. As a recent founder, it's like speak directly to me. I feel like I have more power on this than I was when I was a product designer. So I invite all designers to join and or start their own venture because I feel like we have this way of thinking that is beautiful, that can shape things better. That was just a side note. And my question was the same way phones shape the way we live today. Do you feel, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you feel like the fact that we now don't Google but we ask questions to ChatGPT, is it going to shape our way of thinking or interacting? How do you see that in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. We're actually looking at this. There's a faculty member at Bentley who is trying to understand the experience and also the comprehension levels of people who are trying to learn a new topic through Googling versus using ChatGPT and what that experience is like and which one is actually more effective. And so that research hasn't been completed yet. I have my hypotheses, right? And I even find myself relying more on that than Googling, because with Google, right, you have to search and then click on a page and read something and then go back and click on another page and read something and then try to smush it back together with what you read on the first page. It's like a harder process, right? And so, but I also stopped myself multiple times and say like, well, where is this information being sourced from, right? And what if I ask a different generative AI engine? And so I think the more awareness we have around that, the more people will be more intentional. But I worry that people are adopting these technologies at lightning speed and not really questioning them. Mm-hmm. That being said, anybody can publish anything on the internet and find it through Google. And so part of me is like, well, we were sort of dealing with the same challenge before. It's just a little bit more efficient now. Mm-hmm. And maybe actually smushing together all these perspectives in a ChatGPT answer feels a little bit more like inclusive versus just looking at one or two references that you find through Google. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I asked it a question for this presentation, and then it gave me some kind of response, and I said, I don't think that's right. I think you might have made that up. And it immediately said to me, yes, I think you're right. I think I made that up. And I was like, okay, this is a problem.
It's not a question, I just wanted to piggyback. So if you want a hybrid between a search engine and a GPT, I'm a writer, so I like a thing called perplexity. Yeah. You just ask it a question, and then it answers you. It's, yes, an AI model, but it also cites like where it's sourcing the information from.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Perplexity. Yes, I'm going to start using that from now on.
I don't know how good it is, but yeah, I've been finding it useful. Yeah, just for a baseline search.
Great. I think we're good. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Janelle. We're going to take a 15-minute